when is the first Talmud printed? Who makes the decision what to put in? Who accepts that? And does that change as new editions are printed?
So this is a complicated story that I know a little bit less about. My life is manuscripts. I just said goodbye to the old Sifri Alumit 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to be again in November at the new Sifri Alumit, because without those manuscripts, I can't work. And I want to say about the manuscripts, before we talk about printed, one of the interesting things about the manuscripts, we don't have that many early Tosafot manuscripts. In other words, and on some Masechtas, how many manuscripts of Tosafot do we have? One. There are even a couple for which we have none. But they were so popular, they survived. So even if and if you look through, there's a very wonderful list. Tashma had a Sefer Zikaron where Benjamin Richler, who worked many years at the Machalons at Slumi Kitvei Yad, put out an article on Tosafot in Kitvei Yad. You look, a lot of the Tosafot that we have, the earliest manuscript is 15th century. That's pretty late. Some are 14th. Right? I mean, the earliest medieval Ashkenazic halachic works. It's not like the Geniza. The earliest works are late 12th century, early 13th century. Even Rashi on Chumash, you can hardly get anything before 1180 according to some, and the best one is 1233 and all of that stuff. So a lot of these manuscripts are late, or they're in Tav Yad Sfaradi. Nothing wrong with that. Harder to read, but nothing wrong with that. Again, so it's obviously a derivative. So then the question becomes, well, how do we know these are the Tosafot? And the answer is because everybody had them. And, people like the Trumat Hadeshen or the Marshal later or the Marik will say, oh, yeah, that's the real one. That's our Tosafot. That's ours. They're not working academically. They're just working with, they want to have the right text. So there's not a crisis of faith in terms of the authenticity of the text per se, even though the manuscript bases are not as rich as we might like. And you'd like to have, don't we have 6 manuscripts on each Masechta we can compare? No. Same problem with Rashi on Shas, where there have been some very interesting critical editions of Rashi that they did at Bar Ilan years ago, and I hope they do some more. But then we come to the printing phase, and it gets more complicated. And again, I'm not as into this as I am into the manuscripts, and I'd recommend material, especially by, I'll say something anyway, but Marvin Heller has some really good stuff on the printing of the Talmud. You also have the fellow, Yaakov Meir, who's working on Talmud manuscripts, but he's working also on the development of the printed Talmud, doing terrific work. The problem is, I had one teacher who once said, the printed Tosafot are the cheapest manuscripts. I don't think it's exactly right, but he's not far off. In other words, Mashi Higili Adam, they print it. And again, Jewish printers, non-Jewish printers, advisors. So some of it was helter-skelter. Now, so you'll tell me, so maybe our Tosafot are junk, God forbid. Again, the answer is there were enough Lomdim who had learned Tosafot even before printing, right? In some copied forms. There are people who, you could still meet a few today, not as many as you used to meet, who can tell you, Rashi and Tosafot, Oisevenig, Baal Peh, up and down the pages, and they would tell you, yes, no, maybe, right? The same way the Bach goes, puts in this word, takes out that word. He's got it all. He's not sitting with 50 manuscripts. He's sitting with his head and things that he knows. So the good news is there's nobody who thinks the Tosafot on Masechet X are Mezuyafim. There's no such, as far as I know. There's Besamim Rosh, which is a tribute to the Rosh, Tshuvot, which may be Mezuyafim, even though Rabbi Kiva quotes from Halacha, but anyway, we won't go into that now. There are famous Mezuyafim. Tosafot is not among them. Having said that, it behooves us, but as I say, I think it's actually been done to a large extent to make sure that everything that we have in manuscript is reviewed. And by the way, to ascertain the proper text of Tosafot, it's not sufficient to look at all the manuscripts of Tosafot or all the early printed editions and Canubula, all that stuff. You also have to look at other Tosafist works which contain Tosafot. There's somebody once asked me something about a Tosafot in Erevin, and I said to them, oh, yeah, you got to look here in the Or Zarua. He's got a better version. I said, the Or Zarua is a Sefer Halacha, Hilchot Erevin, Mashayachu La Tosafot. I said, no. He's got a whole piece of Tosafot Rash Bishans that he got when he was in Paris. He stuck them into the Sefer Or Zarua. You want to know the best Tosafot text? And sure enough, on that particular passage, very interesting about how many mezuzahs you need, what rooms, and so on. Mem Aleph, Mem Gimel, somewhere. Or maybe Ayin off. Anyway, I'm forgetting. Much longer version, much more specifics in that Or Zarua. So the good news is we generally have true Tosafot. Again, they're complicated by the fact that Eliezer Mituch's, pressed wood sometimes elide some of the connections, but he's really dealing with early material. He's got his Ri and his Rash Mishans and his Rabbeinu Tam. But so we don't always have the original version exactly, but there's very little. There's the famous Tosafot Ketubot on Daf Kuf Yud, where Tosafot says, Reb Chaim says that Bisman Hazeh no mitzvah lalot, right? And he goes, Talmid Toeh, Red Lum, yeah, fine. I can find just 6 other texts where he says exactly that in other contexts, say from Mordechai, and there's a whole machloket between French and German scholars, rabbinic scholars at that period, on this very point. So again, not that we can't argue the merits of the position, but it's Rabbeinu Tam says in one place in Tosafot Avodah Zarah about touching non-Jewish wine and what that does in terms of Jews doing business with it. Oh yeah, the Talmud who wrote that Tosafot, the Talmud who copied it, I'm going to say it my way, wasn't ready for prime time. That line, change that line. So there are things that po v'sham have to be fixed, but I don't think we have crisis of faith or crisis of halacha or crisis of substance that our Tosafot are somehow mezuyafim or we've got incomplete. Like I say, if you can get earlier Tosafot, they're usually fuller, more informative. No sin in that, right? If you want to learn the Tosafot with the Tosafot HaRosh and know more and impress your Rebbe, I'm sure he'll be impressed. Right? By the way, the Tosafot HaRosh, it's been noticed by Lamdanim, same as Tosafot that Ramban cites, because he's working off Tosafot Shans. He's a smart man. He used early Tosafot. He knew he had this early material. He was working with the original thing. So I guess what I'm saying is the Tosafot has pretty good checks and balances. Again, it's a dirty word today, but pretty good checks and balances within itself. It's hard to fool the whole complex. An individual might say, but if you survey the literature properly, not hard to pinpoint. So the printing issue is an issue, but I think it's not a fatal one.